Mom?
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is about a mother, her son, and the quiet moment when help begins to sound a lot like control. It is the kind of family situation many people never talk about out loud. Money, grief, aging parents, adult children, boundaries, and that painful question, when does concern stop being love and start becoming power? So settle in, because Daisy's story begins with something as simple as a box of coffee cake on a kitchen table, and ends with a house so empty, her own son finally understood what he had pushed her to do. My son said, "From now on, we will manage your money for you." I said nothing. I went upstairs, closed the door, opened my phone, transferred my money, and left without saying a word. The next morning, when they woke up, all that was in front of them was an empty house. My son called it a conversation. He brought coffee cake. That was how I knew it was not a conversation. The box sat between us on my kitchen table like an offering no one truly meant. It came from the bakery on Maple Avenue, the one with the striped awning and the bell over the door, the bakery my husband used to stop by every Friday morning after his physical therapy appointments. The cardboard was cream-colored and tied with red twine. A small grease stain had bloomed in one corner where the butter had soaked through. I noticed that stain more than I noticed my son's face at first. At 68, you learn that the smallest details often tell the truth before people do. My son sat across from me at my own kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The maple outside the window had turned the color of old copper, and a damp line of leaves had collected along the back fence where the wind always pushed them. The coffee cake remained untouched in its bakery box. He had placed it carefully in the center of the table, then folded his hands beside it as if we were about to discuss something ordinary. Roof gutters. Thanksgiving plans. Whether I wanted him to come by and clean the garage before winter. But his shoulders were too square. His smile was too calm. He had the look of a man who had already had this conversation in his head many times and had already decided which version of me would be easiest to handle. "Mom," he said, "we think it's time someone helped you manage the finances." We. That word landed before anything else. Not he. Not I. We. Which meant this had already been discussed somewhere I had not been invited. Maybe over dinner at their house. Maybe while Renee folded laundry in my guest room and lowered her voice because she believed old walls did not carry sound. Maybe while my son sat in his car outside his office, one hand on the steering wheel, telling himself he was being responsible. I set down my mug slowly. The mug was blue stoneware with a hairline crack near the handle. My husband, George, had bought it for me in Vermont 23 years earlier because I had admired it in a shop window and then walked away saying we did not need one more mug. He had gone back for it while I was looking at postcards. I still used it every morning. "Someone," I said. "Who did you have in mind?" My son smiled the way people smile when they have rehearsed. "Us, me and Renee. We've been talking, and with everything you're carrying alone since Dad passed, it just makes sense to have a second set of eyes." A second set of eyes. On my retirement account, on the savings I built over 31 years as a registered nurse. On the pension I earned working night shifts while he slept soundly in the bedroom down the hall with a baseball nightlight plugged into the wall. On the life insurance proceeds I had handled carefully and without ceremony because grief did not stop the mortgage company from expecting payment on the first of the month. A second set of eyes on money I had earned in shoes that never stopped hurting, in hallways that smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee, in rooms where families whispered over bedsides and machines kept rhythm for hearts that could no longer be trusted to keep it alone. "I managed just fine," I said. "Of course you do." He said it too quickly. The way you agree with someone you have already decided to override. "It's just that Renee mentioned you made another donation last month to that literacy nonprofit, and the month before that to the animal shelter." I looked at him carefully. "How does Renee know what I donated?" His eyes moved away from mine for half a second. It was small, almost nothing. But I had spent decades watching for the almost nothing in people's faces, the wince before pain was admitted, the flicker before bad news was spoken, the glance between adult children who wanted the doctor to say what they did not want to say themselves. "She saw the mail," he said. Saw the mail. In my house, where Renee had been staying for 3 weeks because their kitchen was being renovated, and it was just temporary, of course, just practical, just family. Just family had become one of those phrases people used when they wanted to step over a line without naming the line. Their kitchen renovation had begun with a broken dishwasher, then became a full cabinet replacement, then somehow became a reason for Renee to use my guest room, my laundry room, my pantry, my quiet mornings, and, apparently, my mail. I had given them a key. That was what people would say if they heard this story from the outside. "Well, you gave them a key." As if trust were a mistake only because someone else chose to abuse it. "Those are my choices," I said. "Absolutely." That word again. That performance of agreement. Renee used it too. Absolutely. Of course. Totally. All those bright little words that appeared right before she did whatever she had already decided to do. My son leaned forward, resting one forearm on the table. He had George's hands. Broad palms, square nails, a faint scar near the knuckle from the summer he was 12, and tried to sharpen a pocket knife on the back step after being told not to. "We just want to make sure no one takes advantage of you," he said. "There are a lot of scams targeting people your age. People your age. There are sentences that do not shout and still manage to take the air out of a room." I was 68. I had managed a cardiac unit for 11 years. I had calculated medication dosages under pressure, written care plans, and trained staff half my age who went on to run their own departments. I had held hands with women younger than my son while they waited for biopsy results. I had once stood between 2 shouting relatives in an ICU waiting room at 3 in the morning and made them both sit down using nothing but my voice. I had also, 6 months earlier, negotiated the sale of my late husband's business equipment entirely on my own because his business partner assumed I would not know what anything was worth. I did know. I knew exactly. George had run a small equipment repair business for 27 years out of a corrugated metal building on the edge of town, the kind of place with a gravel lot, a Coke machine that had not worked since 2014, and men who came in wearing seed caps and work boots. After he died, his business partner, Al Mercer, sat in my living room with a folder and a sympathetic expression and offered me a figure so low it was almost insulting enough to be funny. Almost. I had let him finish. Then I had opened my own folder and asked why he had failed to include 2 hydraulic lifts, 3 diagnostic scanners, and the compressor George had purchased the year before. Al's ears had gone red. I had sold everything for what it was worth. People your age. "I appreciate the concern," I said. And I meant neither word. My son reached for a slice of the coffee cake, relaxed now, as if the difficult part was over. He pulled back the wax paper and placed a piece on one of my dessert plates. He did not ask whether he could use the plate. "Small things. Always small things first. We could just get you set up with a financial advisor," he said. "Someone we trust. It would take the pressure off." Someone we trust. Not someone I trusted. Someone they had already identified, already spoken to, perhaps already arranged. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had rocked through ear infections at 2 in the morning, the boy whose college application essays I had read 17 times, the boy who used to press his forehead into my shoulder when thunder rolled across the roof, the boy who had cried in the hospital parking lot after George died because he said he did not know how to be a man without his father in the world. And I understood something that made the room feel very still. He had come here with a plan, and the coffee cake was the part where I was supposed to feel grateful. "My name is Daisy, and I want to tell you something I have learned in 68 years. When someone presents control as care, the most dangerous thing you can do is argue. Because the moment you argue, you become difficult. And difficult, when you are a woman of a certain age, can become a label people use against you. Difficult becomes emotional. Emotional becomes confused. Confused becomes concerning. And concerning, in the wrong mouth, can become paperwork. So I smiled and told my son I would think about it. What I was actually thinking about was whether Renee had already been through the filing cabinet in my study. They left that evening, both of them, my son and Renee, walking out to their car with the ease of people who believed they had planted something that would grow. Renee had come downstairs just before they left, wearing one of those cream sweaters that made her look softer than she was. Her hair was twisted at the back of her neck, and she smelled faintly of vanilla perfume and the lavender detergent she had started using in my washing machine without asking. She touched my arm at the door and said, "We just love you so much." Her voice had that particular softness some people use when they want something and prefer not to say so directly. "I know," I said. "I did not say thank you." She blinked, because people like Renee expect gratitude for the emotional wrapping, even when the thing inside it is not kind. My son kissed my cheek. "Think about it, okay?" "I will." I watched them walk down the front path beneath the porch light. Their car was parked behind my hydrangeas, and Renee looked back once before getting in, as if checking whether I was still standing there. I was. I closed the door. Then I locked it. Then I walked to the study. George used to call it my command center, though it had never been grand enough for a name like that. It was a small room off the hallway with a built-in bookcase, a desk from Office Depot, and a brass lamp shaped like a pharmacy lamp that gave off a small green glow when the rest of the house was dark. The filing cabinet stood beneath the window. Gray metal. 2 drawers. Unattractive, practical, mine. The filing cabinet was closed, but the second drawer, the one with the financial folders, was not fully latched. I always close it completely. I had closed that drawer completely for 12 years because the latch sticks and you have to press it firmly. I know exactly how it feels when it catches. There is a little resistance, then a dull click. It had not caught. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The house was quiet. The clock on the mantel ticked the way it always did. The African violet on the windowsill needed water. Somewhere outside, a truck moved slowly down the street, tires whispering over wet leaves. I stepped into the room and placed my fingers on the drawer handle. It slid open too easily. I pulled out the folder labeled retirement accounts and flipped it open. Nothing was missing, but the pages had been rearranged. I keep statements in reverse chronological order, most recent on top. I keep paper clips on the left side, not the right. I keep the brokerage statement behind the pension statement because I prefer fixed income first, variable second. The February statement was now behind the March one. A paperclip had been turned sideways. Someone had been reading, and someone had put things back just slightly wrong. That was the thing about people who snoop. They are never as careful as they believe themselves to be. They think secrecy is about not being caught in the act. They forget that people have rhythms, habits, systems, private little orders that make no sense to anyone else until someone disturbs them. I closed the folder. I did not call my son. I did not confront Renee. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the window, watching the last of the light leave the yard. The oak tree my husband planted the year we moved in was dropping leaves. George had planted it too close to the fence because he had never been as good with spacing as he believed. Every autumn, he would stand in the yard with a rake and say, "Next year I'm hiring someone," and every year he did it himself. He had been gone 14 months. And in those 14 months, I had paid every bill on time, managed the estate, handled the accounts, sold the equipment, and donated to causes I believed in because I had earned the right to spend my own money on whatever moved my heart. I had written a check to the literacy nonprofit because my mother had not learned to read well until she was nearly 40, and I remembered the way she signed forms with embarrassment tucked behind her smile. I had donated to the animal shelter because George and I had adopted a mutt named Biscuit there in 2008, and that dog had slept at the foot of our bed for 11 years. No one had taken advantage of me. I had made choices. There is a difference. I thought about that for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called my friend Carol. Carol had been my closest friend since we worked the same floor together in 1994. She had retired before me, moved to Tucson 2 years ago, and had the particular gift of listening without filling the silence with her own opinions. She answered with wind in the background. "Are you outside?" I asked. "Walking before the coyotes claim the neighborhood," she said. "What happened?" That was Carol. No wasted words. She could hear the shape of trouble in a hello. I told her what had happened. The coffee cake, the conversation, the filing cabinet, the rearranged pages. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Eleanor would have told them to get out." Eleanor would have. I agreed. Eleanor was another friend of ours, formidable and sharp, the kind of woman who had once made a hospital administrator cry in a budget meeting without raising her voice. She had worn red lipstick every day, including the day she started chemotherapy, and had once told a surgeon he was not God, merely well-scheduled. "But I don't want to escalate until I understand how far this has already gone," I said. "How far do you think it's gone?" Carol asked. I looked at the African violet on the sill. Its leaves had gone slightly soft at the edges. Far enough that they sent Renee to stay here for 3 weeks during a renovation that, as far as I can tell, is already finished. Carol exhaled. "Daisy." "I know. What are you going to do?" I looked at the oak tree in the yard. "I'm going to be very, very agreeable," I said, "for a little while." Carol was silent just long enough for me to know she understood. Then she said, "Document everything." "I will." "And don't sign a thing." "I won't." "And Daisy?" "Yes?" Being calm does not mean being passive. I looked around my kitchen, at the magnet from Niagara Falls on the refrigerator, the yellow dish towel over the oven handle, the little ceramic bowl where George used to drop his keys. "No," I said, "it doesn't." And before we continue, if this story is already pulling you in, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more stories like this reach people who understand how complicated family can become when love, money, and control start crossing the same line. Now let's get back to Daisy, because what she did next was not loud, not dramatic, but it changed everything. The next morning, I called my bank. Not to ask questions, to make an appointment with someone in private client services. The woman on the phone had a cheerful voice and asked what I wanted to discuss. "Account security and estate structure," I said. There was the smallest pause, then her tone changed into something more serious. "We can help with that." "I know," I said. I also called an estate attorney named Patricia Huang, whose name had been on a card in my wallet for 2 years, given to me by a colleague at my last nursing conference who said simply, "Keep this. You never know." I had kept it tucked behind my health insurance card. You never know. I knew now. Patricia picked up on the third ring. Her voice was calm, direct, and blessedly free of sympathy. I have never trusted sympathy at the beginning of a professional conversation. Sympathy can be kind, but it can also be fog. I wanted clarity. I explained the situation without drama. The financial discussion, the rearranged documents, the long-term house guest, the suggestion of a financial advisor they trusted. When I finished, she asked me one question. "Have you signed anything?" "No." "Have they made any formal requests in writing?" "Not yet." "Good." She paused. "What they're describing, stepping in to manage your finances, under the reasoning that you need oversight, that is the kind of language people sometimes use when they are building toward legal control. They may not know that is what they are building toward. Or they may know exactly. I thought about Renee's voice at the door. We just love you so much. They know, I said quietly. Patricia did not argue with me. I appreciated that. Then we prepare as if they know, she said. Those words steadied me more than any comfort could have. We prepare. Not panic. Prepare. Patricia laid out options the way a good clinician presents a care plan, clearly and without rushing, letting me absorb each one. A revocable trust, structured so that I retained full control while making any future claim of mismanagement nearly impossible to argue. A financial power of attorney, tightly worded, naming someone other than my son. A letter on file with my bank flagging that any third-party inquiries required my direct authorization. She explained each point without making me feel small for needing the explanation. That mattered. People underestimate how often older people are not confused, only tired of being spoken to as if they are. And then she mentioned something else. You could also relocate your primary assets, she said. Not hide them, restructure them. Move them into instruments that require your active participation to access. Illiquid enough that they cannot be touched quickly. Documented enough that any attempt to challenge your competence would require demonstrating you made these arrangements in error, which would be very difficult given that they are sophisticated and legally sound. Sophisticated. Legally sound. The words settled into me like something warm. How long would that take? I asked. If you're ready to move quickly, 2 to 3 weeks. I need to think about that, I said. And I meant it. But I was also already thinking about it in the way you think about a decision you have essentially already made. When I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for nearly 20 minutes with the phone in my hand. The coffee cake was still there. I had not thrown it away. That would have felt dramatic, and I had no use for drama. I cut a small slice, placed it on a plate, and took one bite. Too sweet. George would have liked it. I wrapped the rest and put it in the freezer because that is what women of my generation do. Even when the cake arrives with an agenda, wasting food still feels wrong. 2 days later, my son stopped by alone. No coffee cake this time. That told me something too. The first visit had been staged as warmth. The second was business. He sat down at the kitchen table with the look of a man who had spent the night rehearsing. He wore the navy fleece vest his company had given him, the one with the embroidered logo over the heart. His phone was face down beside his elbow, but I could see his thumb tapping once against the case, then stopping. Renee and I have been doing some research, he began, about financial planning for widowed seniors. Widowed seniors. I had been a widow for 14 months. Before that, I had been a wife, a nurse, a homeowner, a taxpayer, a voter, a reader, a gardener, a person. Now I was a category. I've been doing my own research for 30 years, I said pleasantly. He gave a small laugh, but it did not fully become one. I know, Mom, you're very capable. No one is saying you're not. That was another thing people said before treating you as if you were not. He leaned forward slightly. Mom, we found someone. A financial advisor named Greg. He works specifically with families in situations like yours. Families in situations like yours. Not you. Families. As if I were a situation the family was managing together. What situation is that? I asked. He hesitated. Where one spouse has passed and the surviving partner isn't used to handling everything alone. I looked at him. I managed the ICU budget for 7 years, I said. I negotiated vendor contracts. I handled your father's estate without assistance. I am used to handling things. His jaw tightened slightly. That's different. How? It just is. That is not an answer. He sat back, looked toward the window, and ran a hand over his face. Greg is really good at making sure everything is protected in case anything changes. In case anything changes. That phrase carried its own weight. In case you become confused. In case we need to step in. in case we have reason. I'll keep that in mind, I said. He studied me for a moment, looking for resistance, looking for the argument he could point to later. I gave him nothing. I refilled his coffee. I asked about the renovation. Oh, almost done, he said. Good. Renee has been trying not to be in your way. She has been here 3 weeks, I said. His mouth tightened. The contractors ran behind. Of course. I was entirely, smoothly agreeable. He left looking satisfied. I was not satisfied. I was moving. The following week was ordinary on the surface. That is how I wanted it. I had my neighbor Ruth over for lunch. Ruth was 72, widowed twice, and had the sharpest memory of anyone on our street. She brought a jar of homemade pickles and told me her grandson had gotten engaged to a woman who wore white boots to a pumpkin patch. White boots, Ruth said, as if this revealed a moral condition. I laughed more than the story deserved because it felt good to laugh in my own kitchen. I attended my Thursday morning water aerobics class at the community center. The pool smelled of chlorine and old tile, and the instructor, Megan, wore a headset microphone and shouted encouragement, as if we were all training for the Olympics instead of trying to keep our joints from stiffening. I made a pot of vegetable soup that lasted 3 days. I watered the African violet. I called my friend Dorothy in Portland and talked for an hour about a novel we were both reading. Dorothy believed the heroine should have left her husband by chapter 4. I argued chapter 7. It was a good argument because it did not matter. Underneath, I was working. I met with Patricia twice. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, above a dentist and a tax preparer. The waiting room had gray chairs, a ficus tree, and a framed photograph of the Blue Ridge Mountains that I did not notice until my second visit. Patricia wore simple gold earrings and kept her desk almost empty. No clutter, no family photographs displayed like credentials, just a legal pad, a laptop, and a fountain pen. I want everything clean, I told her. It will be. I don't want to punish anyone. This is not punishment, she said. This is boundary setting with documentation. I liked that so much I wrote it down later. Boundary setting with documentation. I met with the private client advisor at my bank once. Then again. His name was Mr. Alvarez, though he told me to call him Daniel. I did not. He was careful and patient. The kind of man who turned his monitor slightly so I could see every screen while he explained what could and could not be accessed by outside parties. Has anyone contacted the bank claiming to act on my behalf? I asked. Not that I see, he said, then looked up. But we can place a note on the account requiring in-person confirmation for any significant changes. Do that. He nodded once. I signed documents in a quiet office that smelled of carpet cleaner and printer paper. I transferred funds into a structured trust with my name as sole trustee. I updated my financial power of attorney to name Carol, who had agreed without hesitation, who had actually laughed a little and said, "It's about time someone in this family had some sense." Are you sure? I asked her. Daisy. I once stopped a cardiologist from operating on the wrong side because I checked a consent form he didn't want to reread. I can handle your paperwork. That was the sort of confidence I trusted. I also changed the locks. Not dramatically. I hired a locksmith on a Wednesday morning while my son was at work and Renee, who no longer had reason to stay but had somehow not fully left, was at yoga. The locksmith was a man named Terrence, who wore a gray sweatshirt and carried 3 toolboxes. He had kind eyes and did not ask unnecessary questions. Old locks, he said, kneeling at the front door. Original to the house. Good time to update. Yes, I said. It is. The drill hummed softly. Metal clicked. The old brass knob came loose in his hand, dull from 30 years of use. I remembered George installing it, standing barefoot on the porch because he had stepped outside just to test the fit and locked himself out while I was at work. He had sat on the steps for 40 minutes until the neighbor noticed. The memory came and went like a hand passing over water. The locksmith was efficient and polite. When he finished, I tested the new key 3 times. Solid. Clean. Final. Renee texted that afternoon. Her key was not working. She thought it might be stuck. I looked at the message while standing in the produce aisle at Kroger, holding a bag of lemons. For a moment, I imagined all the ways I could answer. That is strange. Try again. I wonder why. Instead, I texted back exactly what was true. I had the locks changed. I'll hold the spare keys from now on. Let me know if you need to stop by and I'll be home. There was a long pause. Then, oh, okay. No worries. No worries. I placed the lemons in my cart. I knew that was not the end of it. My son called that evening. His voice had a new quality, still controlled, but with something underneath it now. Why did you change the locks? I wanted updated security, I said. The old locks were original to the house. 30 years old. You didn't mention it. It's my house, I said pleasantly. I don't need to mention it. A pause. Are you feeling okay? There it was. The first use of that particular question. Are you feeling okay? Which means, are you thinking clearly? Which means, we are beginning to document that you are acting strangely. I feel wonderful, I said. How are you? He did not like that. I heard it in the silence. I'm fine, he said. Good. Mom, changing the locks without telling anyone is a little concerning. To whom? To me. Then you may write that down, I said, still pleasantly. I changed the locks on my own home for security reasons. He went quiet. I had not raised my voice. That was important. After we hung up, I opened my notebook, a plain composition book I had bought specifically for this purpose, and wrote down the date, the time, and the exact exchange. Locks changed. He asked if I was feeling okay. First time he used that framing, he described my private home security decision as concerning. I underlined concerning once. I had a feeling it would not be the last. The advisor arrived on a Saturday. They had not asked me. My son had simply texted, Greg is going to swing by Saturday around 11 if that works. He's really low-key. No pressure. Just a conversation. No pressure. I had begun to notice how often that phrase appeared in high-pressure situations. I texted back, Saturday works. Then I called Patricia and told her. Do you want me present? She asked. No, not yet. Do not sign anything. I won't. Do not verbally agree to anything. I won't. Ask who initiated the engagement. I plan to. Patricia made a sound that might have been approval. Greg arrived 12 minutes early, which told me something. People who arrive 12 minutes early to a private home are not being punctual. They are trying to catch you before you are ready. I was ready. He was young, late 30s, confident in the specific way of men who are used to being trusted by people who do not fully understand what they are agreeing to. His shoes were polished. His watch was too large. His smile was designed to communicate ease without surrendering authority. He had a folder. He had business cards. He accepted coffee. We sat in the living room, where the afternoon sun came through the front windows and lit the dust on the piano. George never learned to play, but refused to sell because he liked the idea of being the kind of family that owned a piano. Greg talked for 20 minutes about portfolio diversification and estate planning and the particular vulnerabilities of widowed seniors managing assets alone. He used the word vulnerable 4 times. I counted. He used legacy twice. He used peace of mind 3 times. He used family as if it were a financial instrument. Then he slid a preliminary engagement letter across the coffee table. I looked at it without touching it. What exactly would your role be? Advisory, he said. Oversight. Helping make sure your assets are positioned correctly. Positioned, I repeated. Correctly according to whom? He smiled. According to sound financial principles. Whose principles? Well, industry standards. Which industry? His smile thinned almost imperceptibly. The financial advisory industry. I see. I let the silence sit there until he shifted. I'd like to understand, I said, whether your engagement here was initiated by me or by my son. A very brief pause. Your son expressed concern and made the introduction, but this would be entirely your decision. Your son expressed concern. There it was in the language of professionals. What concern did he express? I asked. Greg blinked. General concern. About? About you having to manage everything alone after your husband's passing. I see. Did he tell you I requested assistance? No, not exactly. Did he tell you I was unable to manage my accounts? No, nothing like that. Good, I said. I picked up the engagement letter then, not to read it, only to place it neatly back into his folder. Thank you for coming, I said. I'll review the letter with my attorney. He had not expected that. The word attorney changed the temperature of the room in a way I had learned to appreciate. It meant I was not managing things alone. It meant there was a paper trail. It meant the next conversation would be more complicated than he had planned for. Greg cleared his throat. Of course, that's always wise. Yes, I said, it is. He stayed another 10 minutes, though there was no reason to. Men like Greg sometimes stay after they have lost control of a conversation, because leaving too quickly feels like admitting it. He called his remaining points clarifications. I called them smoke. When he finally left, I watched him back out of the driveway from the front window. He paused at the curb, looked down at his phone, and began typing. I wondered whether he was texting my son. Then I called Patricia. They sent an advisor, I said. Of course they did, she said. How did it go? I mentioned you. He left relatively quickly? Yes. She laughed just once, brief and genuine. Good. How are we on the trust documentation? Finished, I said. Everything is signed. Then you are protected, she said. Legally, your assets are in a structure that would take significant effort to challenge, and any challenge would require demonstrating impaired judgment at the time of signing. The signing happened in my office with 2 witnesses, a notary, and a written record of your stated intent. There is nothing to contest. Nothing to contest. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the oak tree. The leaves were almost all down now. The branches were clean against a gray November sky. Across the street, Mr. Hanley was dragging his trash bins back from the curb in his slippers. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. There is a certain kind of ordinary afternoon that becomes historic only in memory. There's one more thing I'm considering, I said. Patricia waited. My son's company relocated to Austin 2 years ago. He kept the house here, but they've been talking about moving permanently. I've heard it in passing for months. There is nothing keeping them here except, I believe, proximity to me. And proximity to your assets? Patricia said, not unkindly. Yes, I said, and proximity to my assets. I paused. I have a sister in Asheville. I've been thinking about her a great deal lately. A moment of quiet. Then Patricia said, You can go wherever you like, Daisy. Nothing is tying you here. Daisy. She used my name, and it sounded the way names sound when the person saying it means it. I know, I said. I'm beginning to remember that. I did not tell anyone. Not yet. I did call my sister Louise, though, that same evening. We had spoken less since my husband died, not from distance of feeling, but from the particular grief that makes calling people difficult because they knew him too. Sometimes you need to speak with someone who remembers him, and sometimes you cannot. Louise and George had liked each other immediately. She said he had honest shoulders. I had never understood exactly what that meant, but she had been right. George was the sort of man who carried groceries in one trip not because he wanted to prove anything, but because he hated making people wait. After he died, Louise had called every Sunday for 3 months. Then I began letting some calls go to voicemail, not because I did not love her, but because love can be heavy when it arrives carrying shared memory. Louise had always been steady, practical, rooted. She had lived in Asheville for 20 years and had a small house with a second bedroom that faced east toward the mountains. She volunteered at a library, grew herbs in coffee cans on her porch, and had once driven 6 hours to bring me chicken soup after my gallbladder surgery, because she said hospital broth was an insult to both chickens and soup. When I told her what had been happening, she was quiet for a long time. I could hear the faint clink of a spoon against a mug on her end of the line. Then she said, "Come here." "I'm not running," I said. "I know you're not," she said. "You're relocating. There's a difference. You of all people know the difference." I smiled at that. "You sound like my attorney." "Your attorney sounds smart," Louise said. "I don't want to bring trouble to your doorstep." "Daisy," she said, "trouble has already found your doorstep. Mine has a porch light." That was Louise. Practical poetry, by accident. The following Tuesday, my son texted, "Renee thinks we should all sit down together, talk through the financial stuff openly." Just family. Just family. I had been hearing that phrase for 2 months now, and each time it arrived with a different weight. Just family, which meant no attorneys. Just family, which meant no documentation. Just family, which meant whatever was said would dissolve into sentiment and obligation, and I would be expected to respond from a place of guilt rather than clarity. I typed back, "I'm happy to talk. I do want to let you know I've been working with an estate attorney, Patricia Huang. I'll have her available by phone if anything legal comes up." 3 hours passed before he responded. "That seems like overkill, Mom. This is just a conversation." "It's just practical," I wrote back. "Same as having Greg available if financial questions come up." Another long pause. Then, "Fine." They came on Thursday evening, my son and Renee, dressed in the careful way of people who want to appear relaxed. My son wore jeans and a sweater, but the sweater was too new. Renee had on soft boots and gold earrings, and she carried a bottle of wine with both hands like a hostess arriving at a dinner party instead of a woman entering a conversation she had helped force. Renee brought wine, which I found almost endearing. "Thought this might make things feel less formal," she said. "Did you?" I asked. She hesitated for the smallest second. Then she smiled. We sat in the living room. Renee opened the wine. My son began with appreciation. He said how much they loved me, how much they had always looked up to me, how hard the last year had been for everyone, and how they only wanted to make sure I was okay going forward. He used the phrase, "going forward," 7 times. I was counting again. Then Renee leaned forward with the particular gentle expression she had perfected and said, "We were hoping maybe we could be added to your accounts, just for visibility. Not to control anything, just to know what's there so we can help if something ever happens. Just for visibility. Just to know. Just to help." I had heard a version of this before. In my career, I had sat across from families who wanted to make decisions for patients who were still entirely capable of making decisions for themselves. There was always this language. Just to know. Just in case. Just to be safe. Sometimes, love said those words. Sometimes fear said them. Sometimes, entitlement borrowed the voice of both. "I appreciate that," I said. "I want to be transparent with you. I've restructured my finances over the past few weeks. I'm working with an attorney and a trust structure that handles exactly the kind of contingency you're describing. Everything is documented and legally protected. The room changed in the way rooms change when information lands that was not expected. It was not loud. No one gasped. No one stood. The wine did not spill. But something shifted behind my son's face, and Renee's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "You already did that?" my son said. "Yes." "When?" Recently. I held his gaze. It's all in order. Renee's smile did not disappear, but it shifted into something thinner. We didn't know you were working with an attorney. I didn't mention it, I said. Same as I don't mention every appointment or financial decision. They're mine to make. My son leaned back. I could see him recalibrating. Mom, we're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to be involved. Involved, I said. In my finances? In your life. His voice had gone careful, the way voices go when they have moved from plan A to plan B without announcing it. We worry, that's all. We worry you're isolated, that you're making decisions without anyone to talk to. Isolated. There was that word, introduced so naturally. I talked to Carol, I said. I talked to Louise. I have my water aerobics class on Thursdays. I have Dorothy in Portland. I have Ruth across the street, who knows every package delivered to every house on this block. I am not isolated. I am simply not consulting you on matters that are not yours to decide. A silence settled over the room. Renee poured more wine no one had asked for. Then my son said quietly, Dad would have wanted us to look out for you. I heard that sentence, and I let it sit for a moment before I answered. Not because I did not know what to say, because I wanted to say it correctly. There are names you do not use as tools. George's was one of them. Your father, I said, spent 34 years watching me handle crises that would have kept most people up at night. He watched me go to work after sleeping 3 hours. He watched me sit at this same table and balance our budget when the roof needed replacing and your braces were due in the same month. He watched me argue with insurance companies, contractors, doctors, school administrators, and once, very memorably, a man from the cable company who tried to charge us for a box we had already returned. My son's eyes lowered. He would be appalled at this conversation, I said. I paused. And so am I. The room went still. Renee looked at her wine glass. My son looked at the floor. I love you, I said, and meant it entirely. And I am not confused, not declining, not isolated, not incapable. I am managing my life the way I have always managed it, and I would like that to be respected. My son looked up at me. Something moved behind his eyes that I could not fully read. Not guilt, not quite. Something more complicated than that. We didn't mean it like that, he said finally. I know, I replied. And I believed that, at least partly. I believed that somewhere underneath the strategy was a genuine fear. A son who had lost his father and was now watching his mother with a panicked kind of math, calculating risk, calculating time, calculating what he thought needed to be secured. I understood that fear. I had seen it in families for 30 years. It was still not acceptable. Understanding a thing and accepting it are different. Renee spoke then, softly. We just didn't want you to be alone with everything. I am not alone with everything, I said. I am alone with some things. That is allowed. She blinked, and for the first time all evening, I saw her without the softness arranged over her face. She looked young, not in age. She was 41, but young in the way people look when they have confused wanting with needing for too long. They left an hour later, quieter than they had arrived. At the door, my son hugged me for a long moment. I hugged him back. I could feel the child he had been somewhere inside the man he had become, and that was what made it hard. People think the hardest boundaries are the ones you set with enemies. They are wrong. The hardest boundaries are the ones you set with people whose baby teeth you saved in an envelope, whose fevers you measured with the back of your hand, whose name you once wrote on every lunch bag in black marker. After the door closed, I stood in the hallway for a while. The house was very quiet. I walked to the study and opened my notebook. I wrote down everything that had been said. Date. Time. The phrases that mattered. Visibility. Isolated. Dad would have wanted. I wrote it all down. Then I closed the notebook and put it in my purse. I had already begun packing in the methodical way I had done everything in my life. Not in panic. In order, 2 suitcases, both practical. A box of books I could not leave. The photo albums. My husband's watch. The one with the small dent on the case from the time he dropped it in the parking lot of a hospital in 1987. He had been bringing me dinner during a double shift. A meatloaf sandwich wrapped in foil and a thermos of coffee because the cafeteria had closed early. He tripped over one of those concrete parking stops and cursed loud enough that Sister Agnes from oncology turned around and said, "George." The Lord heard that. He had laughed for 10 minutes. I packed the watch in a wool sock. I packed the jade plant I had grown from a cutting given to me by a patient's family 20 years ago. Their father had survived a heart event no one expected him to survive, and his daughter brought the cutting in a paper cup saying, "He wants you to have something that keeps going." It had survived every move we had made. It would survive this one. I packed 2 framed photographs, one of George holding our son at age 4 on a beach in North Carolina, both of them squinting into the sun. One of me at my retirement party, wearing a blue dress and looking more tired than happy, though I remembered being both. I left behind the heavy furniture, the china cabinet, the dining table with the scratch near the end, the Christmas dishes, the set of mixing bowls my mother had used before me. Leaving is not always taking everything. Sometimes leaving is deciding what does not need to own you anymore. Louise had already set up the east-facing bedroom. I left on a Saturday morning in late November before sunrise, which is the best time to begin something new. The sky was a particular dark blue that had no name I knew of, and the highway was nearly empty. Frost silvered the edges of lawns as I drove through town. The gas station by the interstate had one truck parked under the lights and a man in a Carhartt jacket filling a paper cup with coffee inside. I drove past the elementary school, where my son had once forgotten his lunch 3 days in 1 week. I drove past the Methodist church, where George and I had attended pancake breakfasts, even though neither of us was Methodist. I drove past the hardware store, where George insisted they knew him by name, though I suspected they called every man over 55 Buddy. I drove with the radio off for the first 2 hours because I did not need anything filling the silence. It was already full of everything I was carrying forward and everything I was choosing to leave behind. Somewhere around the 2nd hour, I cried a little. Not from regret, but from the weight of how much I had loved that house, that kitchen, the oak tree in the yard. The particular way late afternoon light came through the window above the sink while I made dinner. I cried for George, too. Not in the sharp way I had cried in the first months, when grief came like weather and left me standing in rooms unable to remember why I had entered them. This was different, softer, a grief that had learned to sit beside me instead of on my chest. Grief and rightness can exist in the same moment. I had learned that in 14 months of widowhood. I let both be there. By afternoon, the mountains had appeared on the horizon. I had been to Asheville 3 times, and each time the mountains surprised me, not in their size, but in their stillness. They sat in the distance with complete indifference to what anyone required of them. That kind of stillness can feel like permission. Louise was on the porch when I pulled into the driveway. She looked exactly like herself, which is a quality in people I have come to value enormously. She wore a green cardigan, jeans, and the same silver earrings she had worn since 1998. Her hair had gone fully white, and she had stopped pretending she intended to dye it again. She took one suitcase, and I took the other. We did not say much walking in, which was right. The east bedroom was exactly as she had described. A window that faced the mountains. A quilt in deep blues and cream. A wooden dresser that smelled faintly of cedar. A small braided rug beside the bed. A lamp with a pull chain. On the nightstand, she had placed a glass of water, a box of tissues, and a small bowl of peppermints. I nearly cried again at the peppermints. Kindness is sometimes unbearable when you have been bracing for impact. I placed the jade plant on the windowsill. My son called that afternoon. I saw his name on the screen while Louise was making tea in the kitchen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. Then I answered. He had gone to the house that morning, he said, and found it locked and quiet. He had let himself in with his key, or tried to. It no longer worked. Where are you? He asked. His voice had a quality I had not heard before. Not anger, something more honest than that. Safe, I said. I've relocated. A long pause. Relocated where? I'll let you know once I'm settled, I said. I needed some space and some time. Mom. He stopped, started again. We weren't trying to push you out. I know, I said. And I meant it even then, even with the mountains visible out the window and 2 suitcases still unpacked on the floor. I believed that he had not intended to push me out. I believed the intention had been control, dressed in care, and that those 2 things are not always chosen consciously. I need you to understand something, I said. I am not disappearing. I am not punishing you. I am giving myself what I should have claimed 6 months ago, distance enough to breathe, and proof that my choices are entirely my own. He was quiet for a moment. The accounts, he said. Greg said the engagement letter never came back. There it was. Even then, even while asking where I was. The accounts. It won't, I said. My accounts are in a trust. My attorney has documentation of everything. If you ever need to reach me for a genuine emergency, you have my number, but financial visibility is not something I'll be granting. I just wanted to help. I know, I said. You can help by trusting that I know what I'm doing. The call ended without resolution, which was honest. Resolution was not the point. The point was that the conversation had happened on my terms, from a room I had chosen, looking at mountains that did not ask anything of me. Louise appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea. He upset you? She asked. No, I said, then corrected myself. Yes, but not enough to change anything. Good. She handed me the tea. Drink this before it gets cold. I put honey in it. I unpacked slowly, which is the only correct way to begin a second chapter. The bookshelf went up first, which is always where I start. Louise had left a section empty, as if she had known. I filled it with the books I had brought, and immediately it looked like somewhere I lived. Books are anchors for people who have moved more internally than externally. I put my sweaters in the dresser. I placed George's watch in the top drawer. I leaned the photographs against the wall until I could decide where they belonged. That first night, I slept badly, but peacefully. Those are different things. I woke at 2, then 4, then just before 6. Each time, I had the strange half-second of not knowing where I was. Then I saw the outline of the mountains beyond the window and remembered. I had left. I was safe. No one had my key. In the weeks that followed, the Asheville mornings turned cold and brilliant. Louise and I fell into a rhythm quickly, the way old friends do, because she was an old friend before she was my sister, and some people simply know how to share a house without crowding each other. She made coffee dark and strong and left it on the counter without comment. I made soup on Sundays. We read in the evenings and argued about things that did not matter. She believed every mystery novel needed fewer detectives with drinking problems. I believed she was generally right, but said it too often. We went to the farmer's market on Saturdays, where people sold apple butter, handmade soap, and tomatoes long after tomato season should have ended. We bought bread from a woman with gray braids, who called everyone honey in a way that did not feel false. We drove part of the Blue Ridge Parkway one clear morning, because Louise said the leaves were almost gone and the bare trees had their own beauty if you were not determined to be disappointed. She was right. The hills rolled away in blue layers, and for the first time in months, I felt something inside me unclench without asking permission. I found a volunteer position at a local clinic 2 mornings a week, assisting with patient intake. It was simple work, far below my former level, and I chose it deliberately. Some days, the work that heals you is not the most demanding. Some days, it is the work that reminds you of what you are still capable of offering. The clinic sat beside a Baptist church and across from a tire shop. The waiting room chairs did not match, and the coffee was terrible. The receptionist, a young woman named Maya, had purple glasses and a laugh that carried down the hallway. On my first morning, she handed me a clipboard and said, "We're grateful to have you. Not careful with you. Not concerned about you. Grateful to have you." I went into the restroom and cried for 90 seconds, then washed my hands and went back to work. Nobody there questioned my competence. They were grateful for it. My son texted in December. Short. Tentative. "Just checking in. How are you doing?" I read it while sitting at Louise's kitchen table, where sunlight fell across a bowl of oranges. I replied, "Doing well. Settling in. How are you?" And that was the beginning of a new version of the same relationship. Not repaired. Not the same. Something slower and more careful. The way things grow back after being cut to the root. He sent pictures of the children decorating cookies. My granddaughter had frosting on her nose. My grandson had used so many sprinkles that the cookie looked geological. I sent back a heart and wrote, "Tell them Grandma Daisy says those are museum quality." He replied, "They're proud." I sat with that for a while. There is pain in reduced contact, but there can also be mercy. A small message can carry more honesty than a long performance. Renee texted once separately, which surprised me. She said, "I owe you an apology. I crossed a line and I'm sorry." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down, made coffee, and read it again. Louise watched me over her newspaper. "Who is it?" "Renee." That was all Louise said, but it contained several chapters. I typed, "Thank you." Then I erased it. I typed, "I appreciate you saying that." Then I erased that too. Finally, I wrote, "Thank you. I accept the apology." I meant it without condition. Acceptance is not the same as restoration. That is another lesson people dislike. The filing cabinet, it turned out, had been her. She told me 3 days later in a longer message, one of those messages people write when they have carried shame around long enough that it begins to feel heavier than honesty. She had gone looking for numbers, for a sense of scale, because she and my son had already found a house they wanted in Austin and needed to know, she explained later, what kind of help they could count on. What kind of help they could count on. Not ask for. Count on. I sat with that phrase for a long time. They had never intended to take my money. They had only, in the most dangerous way possible, begun to count it as theirs. I understood that distinction. It did not change what I had done. What I had done was right, regardless of what they had intended. In January, I had the trust documents reviewed by a second attorney just as a matter of practice. Everything was clean. Everything was mine. Patricia called to confirm, and I asked how she was doing. She laughed and said I should be asking you that. "I'm well," I said. "I'm genuinely well." And that was simply true. Not every hour. Not every morning. There were still days I woke missing George so sharply that the absence beside me felt like an object in the room. There were still moments when I wanted my old kitchen, my old street, the sound of my son's car pulling into the driveway before everything became complicated. But wellness does not mean nothing hurts. It means the hurt is no longer driving. I visited for the grandchildren's Christmas recital 3 weeks late because the drive in winter required planning. The school was the same kind of elementary school my son had attended decades earlier, though brighter now, with security doors and murals of smiling planets on the hallway walls. The cafeteria smelled of floor wax, hot chocolate, and damp mittens. Children ran everywhere in church shoes and glittery dresses, holding paper snowflakes and construction paper stars. My granddaughter spotted me first. "Grandma Daisy." She ran into me with the full force of 7 years old. I held her longer than she expected and felt her small ribs expand as she breathed. My grandson gave me a drawing of a mountain with a green plant in the window of a house. "That's your new place," he said. "It's beautiful," I told him. "It has a dragon behind it, but he's friendly." "Good. I prefer friendly dragons." My son and I stood in the school hallway while the children ran ahead of us, their paper snowflakes and construction paper stars crinkling in their hands. For a while, we watched them without speaking. Then he turned to me and said quietly, "I didn't think you'd actually leave." "I know," I said. "I thought you needed us more than you apparently did." "I needed you," I said, "just differently than you assumed." He nodded at that, looking at his shoes. He had his father's way of accepting things that were hard to hear. I had always loved that about both of them. "I was scared," he said after a while. "I know." I kept thinking, what if something happened to you and I hadn't done enough? Then you confused doing enough with taking over. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. It was the first clean yes he had given me in months. I let it stand. "You could come back," he said, "if you wanted." "I'm happy where I am," I said, "but I'll come visit more." That was enough for both of us. Renee approached then, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate and wearing an expression I had not seen on her before. Not performance, not softness, caution. "Daisy," she said. "Renee, I'm glad you came." "So am I." She handed 1 cup to my granddaughter and 1 to my grandson. Then she turned back to me. "The African violet is doing well," she said. I looked at her. "I've been taking care of it." "I hoped you would." Her eyes filled unexpectedly, and she looked away. I did not comfort her. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I have learned not to rush people away from the discomfort that might teach them something. What I know now, after 68 years, and 1 deliberate departure, is this. The instinct to protect someone you love can become, without your realizing it, the instinct to control them. And the people we love most are often the ones we most easily mistake for our own extension, our own responsibility, our own future to arrange. I was not my son's future to arrange. I was not a balance sheet to be managed or a risk to be mitigated. I was not an old house someone else could inspect and quietly decide which rooms still had value. I was a woman who had worked hard, loved fiercely, survived grief, and earned the absolute right to spend her own money on the causes that moved her, to change her own locks, to drive herself to a new city at 68 with 2 suitcases and a jade plant, and to choose, without explanation, to begin again. The African violet, by the way, I had left behind. Renee had always admired it. Some things you leave as proof that leaving is not malice. It is just clarity about what you are taking and what you are not. The jade plant is still on the east-facing windowsill in Asheville. Every morning, the light comes through it and it glows. Very green, very alive, still rooting, as things do when you give them the right conditions. Sometimes I sit beside it with my coffee before Louise wakes up. The mountains are blue in the early light, and the house is quiet in a way that no longer feels like absence. It feels like room. Room to breathe. Room to remember. Room to decide. My son calls on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, but often enough. He asks about the clinic. I ask about the children. Renee sometimes comes on the line and tells me the African violet has a new bloom. We are not what we were. Maybe we will become something better. Maybe we will simply become something honest. That is enough. That is, in fact, everything. And that is Daisy's story. Sometimes, walking away is not revenge. Sometimes it is the first honest breath a person has taken in years. Daisy did not stop loving her son. She simply stopped handing him the right to manage her life. If this story touched you, or if you have ever had to set a boundary with someone you love. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And let me know in the comments, do you think Daisy did the right thing by leaving without telling them first? Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next story.